Welcome to another episode of Forgotten Uniques. In this series, I'm covering unique items in Path of Exile that aren't used very much, if at all, taking a look at how they function and how their mechanics interact with other parts of the game, especially any recent additions such as ascendancy changes or new unique items. It looks like we may have a bit of a break between Path of Exile 1 and 2 releases, so I thought it would be a good time now to revisit this series. This video is all about the Selfish Shepherd, a unique ring that's exclusively obtainable from ritual reward windows. It's a tier 3 reward, so for normal ritual rewards it's not too common, but not extremely rare either. However, the Selfish Shepherd appears very commonly in nameless ritual reward windows specifically. That's a special type of ritual altar that appears in maps that always offers a selection of ritual exclusive rewards. So let's take a look at the modifiers on the Selfish Shepherd. Firstly, this is a Nameless Ring base, with the implicit modifiers 50% reduced effect of curses on you, and 50% increased elemental ailment duration on you. One thing to note here is that the increased elemental ailment duration on you stat does not scale the duration of ailments that you reflect back onto yourself using something like the Fulcrum, as these ailments are sourced from you, and therefore they only scale with your own offensive modifiers to ailment duration, such as this one here on the Elemental Focus passive tree notable. Okay, let's briefly cover the generic stats on this ring before we get to the unique skill that it provides. There's a cast speed roll here which has a fairly large roll range, 6 to 12% increased cast speed, and I do want to mention here that this is never a wasted stat on this ring, even if you're not really a caster build, and that's because the Affliction Spell that this ring provides cannot be triggered and must be self-casted, so this stat will help you do that a bit sooner. There's also the flat ES roll here, plus 30 to 60 to maximum energy shield. Again, this has a large roll range, and whilst a low roll is the equivalent of a tier 3 or 4 modifier on a crafted ring, a high roll here is significantly better than a tier 1 modifier on a crafted ring, which usually caps out at 47 flat energy shield. Lastly, there's a chaos resistance modifier which is very low, plus 7 to 19% to chaos resistance, and even at the top end, you're only getting the equivalent of a tier 4 modifier on a crafted ring. However, that may not be a problem if you're building around the unique ability that this ring provides. Grants level 20 Affliction. This is a spell that applies a debuff to all of your minions in an area when cast, and this spell has two components. First, let's discuss the Degeneration and Recovery portion of the skill. This debuff makes your minions take physical damage over time at an accelerating rate which begins at 8% of their maximum life per second, and adds a further 8% per second. Your character then gains life regeneration equal to 20% of the damage that this debuff is dealing to all of your minions combined. This is one of the methods to achieve some of the highest life recovery in the game, and this is because minion life numbers can be really extreme when scaled correctly, in the hundreds of thousands or even millions of maximum life, and that means that you can quite easily reach tens of thousands of life regeneration. But with some shenanigans, you can pull off hundreds of thousands or even millions of life regeneration per second. However, to achieve this, you need to prevent your minions from dying, and part of the Affliction Skill is that your minions will explode upon reaching 20% of their maximum life. We'll get onto that part in a moment. Now, I will mention one method here that's a bit of a meme, which involves the Dancing Dervish unique sword. This sword summons 2 Dancing Dervish minions upon reaching 15 rampage stacks, and when that happens, your weapon slots are disabled for as long as the minions are alive. The important thing about these minions specifically is that they have a built-in 95% less damage taken from all sources by default. That will go some way to helping you mitigate the damage from Affliction, but unless you're able to somehow fully prevent the damage, no amount of mitigation will ever be enough to sustain them forever, since the damage they take is always accelerating. However, combining this with additional physical damage reduction and a large amount of consistent, instant recovery is enough to keep them alive with the debuff intact. To do this, you need a few things. 5 to dust unique jewels with a combined total of 98% reduced summon skeleton duration, the Heartbound Loop Unique Ring to enable a Cast When Damage Taken loop, a 3-link with level 1 Summon Skeletons, level 1 Cast When Damage Taken support, and level 20 Less Duration support with 20% quality, and this will bring the Summon Skeletons duration down from 20 seconds to just 0.165 seconds after being rounded to the nearest server tick. And you then need a total of at least 52% increased cooldown recovery rate, which is easily obtained from the Saboteur's Like Clockwork notable combined with an Eldritch Implicit on your boots. This character here has 55%, and that will bring the cooldown of Cast When Damage Taken down from the base 0.25 seconds to, you guessed it, 0.165 seconds after being rounded to the nearest server tick. Lastly, you need to ensure that you have a way to pay the skill costs of the triggers, and you need to ensure you are taking enough damage from Heartbound Loop each instance of summoning to resummon in the next cycle. Remember, mitigated damage doesn't count here, but Saboteur helps out once again due to trigger bots, which effectively summons twice the amount of skeletons each time, which means twice the damage taken from Heartbound Loop, and more importantly, twice the recovery for your dancing dervishes when the skeletons perish. But where's that recovery coming from? Two main sources. The Minion Defense Mastery for minions recover 5% of life on minion death, and stacking Life from Death Cluster Jewel Notables for 4% of the same stat each. Additionally, in this example setup here, I'm also stacking Dread March Cluster Jewel Notables combined with the Indomitable Army wheel for the additional physical damage reduction for minions, and very importantly, one Blessed Rebirth Cluster Jewel Notable, which ensures that the skeletons always die from their duration expiring rather than any stray incoming hits, so that the loop cannot be interrupted due to incorrect timing of minion deaths. And this is the result. A loop which consistently triggers summon skeletons over and over again, with each summon creating 4 skeletons, and each skeleton recovering 13% of maximum life for the dancing dervishes when they expire, which is 52% of maximum life instantly recovered every 0.165 seconds for your dancing dervishes. This, combined with the mitigation from their innate less damage taken modifier and the PDR, allows the dervishes to survive pretty much forever. And that's because there is actually a cap to the Affliction Degen damage, which is the dot cap of approximately 35 million. At which point, if you have both dervishes affected by Affliction, you'd be recovering about 14 million life per second, or in the case of this character, Energy Shield, since this setup is using Zealous Oath. Okay, so there's some fun stuff you could do there with Cast When Damage Taken setups, or Cast on Wall Break to spam a bunch of spells whilst having incredible recovery, but it's quite hard to make something out of it due to the amount of investment it requires for all of the jewel sockets and the cluster jewels, and of course the lack of a weapon since your weapon slots are disabled whilst the dancing dervishes are out. But perhaps this will inspire someone to create something cool out of this interaction. However, there's another component to Affliction, and that's the actual intended use case of the skill, which is to damage your minions and cause them to explode for damage in an area. Afflicted minions explode when reduced to a fifth of life, dealing 50% of their life as physical damage to surrounding enemies. Now, you may be familiar with the wording on this modifier from the Minion Instability Keystone, which is very similar. However, Minion Instability deals less damage and its base fire damage, but it only requires your minions to reach 50% of their maximum life. Affliction requires your minions to reach 20%, which is going to naturally take a lot longer using any of the normal methods that Minion Instability setups usually use, such as Infernal Legion, or Tavakai for Summon Raging Spirits, or even Quatra's Regulator with Necromantic Aegis. Notably though, just like Minion Instability, and unlike similar mechanics such as Maw of Mischief, the damage from Affliction's Explosion comes from the minion itself, so you must scale it with modifiers for your minions. Now, 50% of maximum minion life can be a massive hit of damage, and as I mentioned earlier, scaling minion life correctly can yield huge life pools on the correct minions. But this is also base physical damage, which means it can benefit from a few notable mechanics, namely conversion and damage gained as extra, but also poison by default. Now, the first minion type that needs to be mentioned here is the Dark Marionette, which can be raised as a Spectre, and this is a special corpse that can be exclusively acquired from Ritual. So if you're in SSF, you can farm these the same way you'll be farming the Selfish Shepherd ring itself. There's 3 versions of this corpse: Imperfect, Normal, and Perfect, and all 3 of them have the same life scaling, which is quite high at a 2.88 multiplier. However, the normal and perfect version of these corpses also have the added property of exploding on death for 5% of maximum life as each of physical, fire, and lightning damage, and the perfect version also causes Scorch with the explosion based on the fire damage of that hit. So if you can, you want to be using the normal or perfect ones since you'll already be scaling minion life and damage, so this just provides a bit of extra damage. Another notable minion type are Golems, which could be used here thanks to the Elementalist's Liege of the Primordial Ascendancy notable, which also resummons Golems automatically 4 seconds after dying. And of course, there's going to be minions that you can summon yourself. For example, Summon Raging Spirit of Enormity has good life scaling, and also guarantees critical strikes, which is one of the methods to get this explosion to crit. Let's discuss that briefly. The explosion from Affliction isn't a spell or an attack, and it has a base crit of 0, making it quite hard to scale. You can add base crit to the hit via something like the increased critical strike support gem linked to the minion, or the target having the brittle ailment at the time of the explosion. There's also the fresh meat support, which grants adrenaline and a large amount of base crit and crit multi to newly summoned minions for a duration based on their summon duration. For minions that don't have a duration, like raised spectres or golems, this is always 10 seconds. This is one of the largest sources of base crit for minions that applies to all of their hits. But note that adrenaline, whilst providing a nice damage boost, also grants 10% additional physical damage reduction, which isn't ideal if you want to kill your minions faster with the Affliction debuff. Now, what about the explosion damage itself? This is where things get really interesting because you can do a lot of different things with a large amount of base physical damage. Firstly, it's important to mention that this damage will be subject to any inherent conversion that a minion may have. For example, Summon Raging Spirit has a built-in 100% physical to fire damage conversion, so the Affliction Explosion will be converted to fire for these minions. But for many other minions that don't have any inherent conversion, you can choose to convert it if you wish. Triad Grip are a pair of unique gloves which convert minion physical damage to elemental damage types or chaos damage based on the colours of the sockets on the item. This can be a way to fully convert to a specific damage type, allowing you to use damage scalers for the specific type, such as chaos damage with 4 white sockets, allowing you to make use of Despair and, more importantly, Withered, making enemies take much more damage from the explosions. Or you could convert to Lightning with 4 blue sockets, enabling Shock to make targets take increased damage, and also interacting favourably with the perfect Marionette Explosion, which inflicts Scorch, lowering all elemental resistances. But let's stick with the Chaos conversion for a moment, which you could also achieve by making use of the Necromancer's Unnatural Strength notable, which makes minions always have Unholy Might, converting 100% of their physical damage to Chaos damage, and additionally providing a chance to inflict Withered on hit. Chaos Conversion pairs very well with a new unique staff that was only introduced in the Mirage League, the Broken Elegy, which drops exclusively from Suresh of the Weeping Black, and is one of the most common drops from this boss. This item has a lot of synergy with the Affliction Explosion. Firstly, a very large Fizz as extra chaos damage modifier for your minions, and considering the physical damage is coming from minion life scaling, this modifier has the potential to provide a massive chunk of extra damage. There's also a decent increased minion damage roll on here too, but I want to highlight another modifier which is unique to this staff. When a nearby minion dies, gain Rotten Bulwark equal to 7 to 9% of its maximum life. Rotten Bulwark is essentially very similar mechanically to Ward. It provides a barrier of hit pool that can absorb damage up to its maximum from a single hit, but any hit of damage will fully break it and remove it. With good minion life scaling, this modifier can provide barriers with tens of thousands of effective hit pool, but do note that you need to be quite close to the dying minion to gain the buff. The Broken Elegy also triggers level 25 Ceaseless Flesh every second to summon a weak minion from a nearby corpse if possible. This also has some synergy there with the Selfish Shepherd, as you'll be able to consistently apply Affliction to these minions as you do to your main minions, providing extra damage potential and extra life recovery. However, these minions have a base duration of just 5 seconds, and they move very slowly, so you will need to find a way to make them reach 20% of their life before they expire, or consider some minion duration scaling. Now, I'm not going to discuss basic minion damage and life scaling in this video, as this is going to be in line with any similar Minion Explosion builds like Popcorn SRS for example, where you'll be focusing on the same stats. But I do want to discuss the 20% minion life threshold and how to get there in a reasonable time frame. With just the Affliction debuff alone, a minion with no life recovery, no mitigation and no energy shield would take 4 seconds to go from full life to 20%, causing the explosion. And this is one of the biggest reasons that the Selfish Shepherd isn't used much at all. It just takes a bit too long to cause the explosions, not to mention that you need to cast the skill on every minion. But there are ways that you can speed up the process. The most notable is likely the Fortress Covenant, a unique jewel that can rarely be obtained by corrupting Cobalt jewels. This jewel grants some increased damage to minions, and it also grants them some attack and spell block, but any notables in its radius are transformed to instead make minions take 20% increased damage. Depending on how many notables you're able to allocate, you can make Affliction deal the required damage in a much shorter window. There's also the new Suresh of the Weeping Black Bloodline, which has the Afarud Ritual notable to cause minions to deal increased damage and take increased damage for each second they've been alive. And of course, you can utilise mechanics that make minions take more base damage, for example, the Infernal Legion Support Gem, to make them take a percentage of their maximum life as fire damage per second, or in the case of Raging Spirits, you can use the Tavakai unique amulet, making them take chaos damage over time. But there is a way that you can skip the degen process entirely and just immediately cause the explosions when used with spectres or zombies, but it comes at a very large cost. The use of the Umbilicus Immortalis unique belt, which makes your flasks apply to those minions instead of you. This means you can use the Coruscating Elixir unique flask to remove all but one life from your minions, instantly lowering them below the threshold, causing them to explode. And the really cool thing about this interaction is that it's one of the only ways to make use of the Affliction Explosion together with Minion Instability, because usually if you would use them both together, a minion that would reach 50% life would explode due to Minion Instability, and therefore they would never be able to reach the 20% threshold to cause the Affliction Explosion. But by using the Coruscating Elixir Flask along with Umbilicus Immortalis, you can cause the minion to instantly go from full life to 1 life, passing both of the thresholds at the same time, causing both explosions to go off simultaneously for a ridiculous amount of hit damage combined. Okay, so is the Selfish Shepherd really a forgotten unique? The few times that this ring has popped up and had a lot of people talking about it has been for cases where there's an unintended interaction that's either just an outright bug or an unforeseen behaviour between some mechanics. And those cases have caused characters to be able to achieve almost unlimited recovery. In both of those cases, the interactions were hotfixed within days or even hours due to just how powerful they were. But outside of those unintended interactions, I think this really is a forgotten unique. It's being used by just 7 characters in the Mirage League, and I think the reasons I mentioned earlier are the main culprits. The setup is just a bit too clunky to ever be a popular build. It's similar to Minion Instability with a bigger payoff but a much longer ramp time, and it requires a ring slot too. It's just a bit too much maintenance overall to appeal to the average player, but I do think that there are some really fun interactions that can be explored here, especially the combination with the new Suresh staff, the Broken Elegy. There's quite some synergy to tap into there. That's going to be it for this video. Thanks for watching, and as always, stay tuned and stay safe.